Welcome friends! In this mini course, you're going to make your first 2D game in the Unreal Engine using the Paper2D plugin. First of all, let's take a look at the game we're going to create, and then we're going to create a new project. Here is the game. We have a basic player controller that can go up, down, left and right. We have enemies spawning from all directions. We also have a score that we're keeping track of, and we're displaying the score at the top of the game. If we touch an enemy, it's game over, the player disappears, and then the game is restart after a couple of seconds. As you can also see, the score is resetted as well. And you can also tell that there's a background music and also a sound effect when the player touches an enemy. So this is the game that we're going to build. It's a very simple game. It's a great game to learn the basics of 2D development in Unreal. And first of all, like I said, we're going to create a new project. So open up the Unreal Engine. This is version 5.4.3, I believe. But any version that is like 5.4, 5.5 should work. Let's go into the game section here and pick a blank project. Unfortunately, there isn't a default 2D development template here, so we're going to have to create a blank one. We're going to pick C++ here for the project defaults, because in this mini course I'm going to use C++. You can also do the development entirely in Blueprint, but we're going to learn how to do it in C++ as well. For the name, I'm going to say my first 2D game. Make sure to pick a good location for your project and then hit create. This is going to take some time, so let's just wait for it to complete. So the project has been created, and the first thing we're going to do is to get rid of this open world map we got. We absolutely do not need this for a 2D game. So let's go ahead and create a new level. And this is going to be an empty level with nothing inside of it. We're going to save this in a folder that we're going to create in the content folder. We're going to call this levels. And we're going to save the current level inside of the levels folder, and we're going to call it the main level. Just like that. Here it is. Now we're going to go into the project settings from the edit menu, and we're going to set this as the default map or the default level. And to do that, we need to set the editor startup map to the main level and also the game default map, so that when we start the engine, this map is loaded, and when we play the game, this map is also loaded first. Inside of the project settings, we're also going to change a couple of settings. The first one is going to be motion blur. We're going to turn this off because it looks very bad in 2D games. This is a 3D feature, and we also need to turn off auto exposure. So let's turn it off. Here we're going to set it to be manual. And we're also going to set the exposure bias here to be 0. This is also a feature of Unreal that doesn't look good in 2D games, because if you think of it, Unreal is an engine made for 3D games. And we're trying to make a 2D game, so we're going to have to turn off a bunch of features, and the motion blur and auto exposure are one of those features. Okay. Now we're going to go into the edit menu again and into plugins. And here I'm going to show you the Paper2D plugin. So if you type Paper2D, you will see that there's a plugin here called Paper2D. And this is the plugin that lets us make 2D games in Unreal. It adds support for sprites, flipbooks, tile maps, all sorts of different features that you need to make a 2D game. Of course, you don't have to use it, but it really makes it easier. And you can see that this is enabled by default. For some reason, if this is disabled for you, make sure to enable it. We're also going to enable a plugin called Visual Studio Integration Tools. And this is just a good plugin to use when you're using Visual Studio, which we're going to use. So if you're using Visual Studio, go ahead and enable this as well. We're going to have to restart the editor, but I'll do that off camera. I'm not going to do it now. And next up, we're going to bring up Visual Studio. And here we're going to go into my first 2D game. Here we have the source folder with all of our source code inside of it that was generated for us. And in here we have a file called build.cs. This has a list for all the dependency modules we need for this project. And by default, we have a bunch of them here. Now we're going to add Paper2D here into this list because we're going to use Paper2D as a module, so it needs to be included in this list. Make sure to do that and save it. Next up, we're going to go back into Unreal and we're going to import some assets. Here in the content folder, let's create a folder called assets. And in here, we're going to import the assets that I prepared. So you're going to find this in the description of this video. So make sure to download this and then unzip it. These assets are provided by Kenny. So the website is kenny.nl, except for this sound effect, which I created in BFXR, and also this whitepixel.png, but the rest is from Kenny. So thank you, Kenny, for these assets. Let's go ahead and select all of them and drag them into Unreal. You're going to see that one of them have been imported as a normal map. You want to say revert to that one. For some reason, when you have a blue asset like this one, it thinks that it's a normal map. But like I said, just say revert. Let's save all of these. Let's create a folder called textures. And let's create another folder called audio. We're going to put this sound called flowing rocks and the hurt sound effect here. We're going to select both of them and we're going to put them in audio, just like that. And the rest we're going to place inside of textures. Let's go into textures. And now we're going to learn our first, information about the Paper2D plugin. The main thing we want to create is sprites, which are 2D images that we can use in the game. And the way you create a sprite is you take a texture, you import it into the engine, and then you right click and you say sprite actions, create sprite. But before you do that, you should apply Paper2D texture settings right here. So we're going to select all of these, right click, and we're going to say apply Paper2D texture settings. The Paper2D texture settings by default is made for pixel art, but in this case, this is not pixel art, so we're going to have to make a change here. While we have them selected, we're going to right click again, go into asset actions and click on edit selection in property matrix so that we can edit all of these textures at once. And then we're going to go into texture and we're going to set the filter to be trilinear. When you have pixel art, you usually want this to be nearest, which I think is the default value here. This is nearest, but since this isn't pixel art, we're going to set this to be trilinear. I'm also going to set the tiling method here for X and Y to be clamp as well. And this is going to make them look nicer, because if you don't do this, you get some weird artifacts at the edges of the textures. So we're going to make these changes and save, and that's going to do these changes for all of these textures that we have selected. Okay, now that we did those changes, these textures are ready to use. You can click on any of them, right click on any of them, go to sprite actions and click on create sprite. And that's going to create a sprite that you can basically place into the game. Now you can just left click hold and drag this into the game. And then you can, as you can see it in the game world. Awesome. Of course, this isn't how we're going to do this. So let's go ahead and delete that. We're going to create another folder here in the assets folder called sprites. And we're going to place all of the sprites into that folder. So let's do this for the rest of these as well. I'm going to select all of them, right click, create sprite, and I'm going to move all of them into the sprites folder. Awesome, so we are almost at the end of this video. The final thing I want to do is I want to place some assets into the game world. We have a texture or a sprite here called the white pixel, and this is basically a single pixel that is white, and we can do some cool stuff with this. I'm going to drag this into the game, and I'm going to rename this to be the background. We're going to place this at, first of all, 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to scale this up to be 2000 on the X and 2000 on the Z. Let's see where this is. And as you can see, that's going to scale up to look like that. And then we're going to place this at 1000 on the X and negative 1000 on the Z. And that is going to basically center this on the origin. I'm also gonna go into this menu here, and I'm going to add a player start here. And this is going to be at 0, 0, 0. And as you can see, that is 0, 0, 0, and the background is centered around 0, 0, 0. And since this background is white, we can basically give it any color we want by changing the sprite color here. And I'm going to make this a light blue like that. And since this is a single pixel that is white, we were also able to scale this up to any size we want, and it's not going to look weird because it's just a single pixel. So by using this, white pixel sprite, we were able to create, a single color background like this, which is a simple trick that you can use. We also want to, while we have the background selected, go down and set the collision preset here to be no collision, because by default, sprites have collisions in Unreal for some reason. So we want to turn that off. We're going to leave player start at the center here because that's where the player is going to start the game at 0, 0, 0. And we're also going to create a camera. So let's go into this menu again. Let's just search for camera. We're going to bring in a camera actor. And first of all, we're going to place it at 0, 0, 0. We're going to pull it back a little. And we're going to rotate it -90 degrees so that it's looking at the background just like that. And we're going to change the projection mode of this camera from perspective, which is 3D, to orthographic, which is a 2D projection mode. In this mode, we're not going to have any perspective or any depth. So that means we can put the camera exactly, near the background like that, or we can place it very far away, and there isn't going to be any difference because there is no depth in this projection. So that means we can simply leave it at like 500, which is a good length for us to be able to see the camera. And I'm also going to go into the settings here, down here, and set auto activate for player to be player 0 so that we actually use this camera. Now when we play the game, as you can see, we're using the camera, and there's a black circle here, and that's basically the default pawn that was spawned. We can control it by using W and S, as you can see, but this isn't important because we're not going to use that. We're going to create our own player controller, which is going to be the default pawn. But as you can see, the camera is currently working. And if you eject here by clicking on that button, you can actually see the default pawn here. But like I said, we're not going to use that. And finally, I want to talk about the axes in the game world that we're going to use. You can tell that we are in a 3D game world, but we're making a 2D game. So we have an extra dimension that we're not going to use. And that dimension in this case is going to be the y-axis. So you can see that if you look at these arrows here, the x-axis is red and it's going horizontally, and the z is blue and it's going up and down vertically, but y, as you can see, is not in the 2D world that we're creating here. So that is going to be the extra one that we don't really use. So for example, when we have the player in the game, so let's actually drag the sprite in there. Let's put it at 0, 0, 0. It's going to have a horizontal position, which is going to be the X position, and it's going to have a vertical position that's going to be the Z position, as you can see. And the Y is mostly not going to be used. We can use it if we wanted to order stuff so that we see something above the other, but that's basically all we would do with the Y dimension. It's really an extra one that we have in here because we are in a 3D engine. Okay, so that's going to be all for this lecture. We created a new project, we did some settings, configuration in the project settings, we created a new map, we placed down the camera, the background, and the player start, and of course we learned some stuff about the Paper2D plugin and mainly how to create sprite assets, as you can see here. Thank you for watching, and in the next part we're going to start working on the player character.